We have some questions here. Dr. Kaushik, this question is to Dr. Manisha. What are the indications for doing hysterectomy in endometriosis?
Hi, Dr. Kaushik. Thank you for your question. The reason why we would do hysterectomy, and that would be the very last resort doing a hysterectomy, because there are various medical options available, but typically it would be for cases, one, that they have finished childbearing, two, they have very severe adenomyosis, and the period pains are totally compromising the quality of life. And finally, when all the medical options stop working and the patient is getting no relief, and she thinks that she wants to get rid of that uterus, ovaries, that is the only time you would do a hysterectomy. But as I say, hysterectomy has to be the last resort. Doing a hysterectomy in endometriosis patients, especially stage 4 endometriosis, is not easy because you will have a frozen pelvis. So make sure you have the right people on standby if you're doing this procedure on your own, especially having, a surgeon around, a urologist around. So most of these patients, when I do a hysterectomy, I ensure that, the stenting is done, cystoscopy stenting is done at the very start of the procedure before I embark on a surgery. Your planes of dissection have to be very clear and meticulous. And you must explain to the patient that there are times when they may when you do extensive surgery. And nowadays we have moved on to just shaving of the nodules instead of trying to do deep resections, and that also has similar beneficial outcomes. So once again, trying to summarize it, if all your medical line of managements have failed, or if the patient has very severe adenomyosis and is done and dusted with fertility, you will resort to a hysterectomy.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question from Dr. Kaushik only. What to do with the ovaries when we are going ahead with hysterectomy? As it is mentioned that hysterectomized patients can also have endometriosis. So
I think you have to, look at the patient as a whole, look at all the pros and cons of doing bilateral oophorectomy in the patient, consider her age. So now typically if the patient has been a long-term sufferer of endometriosis, her ovaries are totally diseased and compromised by the endometriosis process, then you are better off knocking off the ovaries alongside the uterus. However, if at least one ovary appears to be normal, the patient is young, she is less than 45 years of age, and she could have the beneficial impact of the estrogen in terms of her heart and bone health, in terms of prevention of osteoporosis, then you may leave behind a small amount of ovarian tissue or an ovary, but you must adequately counsel her that when you leave an ovary behind, there is always going to be a risk of recurrence. So this is extremely important: counseling, documentation, and proper informed choice and consent.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. There is one more question. This is from Dr. Akshata DS for Anu ma'am. Why there is 80 ml is the cutoff for menorrhagia?
I didn't get you, Pallavi.
80 ml of blood loss. Why this cutoff? Why this limit is made as a cutoff for menorrhagia? If it's more than 80 ml blood loss, we call it as menorrhagia. Why is that?
That is because if you have more than 80 ml, then there is a chance. You become anemic. Till that, see, generally, if you look at the average blood loss, actually it's around 20 to 25 ml per cycle. But 80 ml, if it is more than 80 ml, that means you are going to become anemic. So we don't want that to happen. That is the reason we call that 80 ml is a cutoff.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Seema Vasudev, the role of mifepristone in treating leiomyomas.
Role of?
Mifepristone.
Okay. See, I didn't touch upon ulipristal and mifepristone because their roles in treating leiomyomas are not well established. Especially mifepristone, it is not well established. We do not have any particular clinical scenarios where we can use only mifepristone and give treatment to for leiomyomas, because you have to understand that the minute you stop, it is like giving GnRH analogs for leiomyoma. You can only give it for 3 months for a certain amount of a certain period of time, and then you have to stop them. You cannot put them on continuous GnRH analogs. Similarly, you cannot put them on mifepristone forever. So there in the current scenario, with so many options available, the scenarios for using mifepristone is very, very less.
Okay, ma'am. And there is one more question. Is it helpful to prescribe GnRH analogs in perimenopausal women to take care of their adenomyosis?
Once again, if we use GnRH analogs for adenomyosis, once again, you are going to use only for about 3 months. You cannot go on forever because you will have the side effects of using GnRH analogs. Then once you stop the GnRH analogs, it is going to come back again. So if you are thinking that the patient is going to get into menopause very quickly, LNG devices are very good devices for adenomyosis, unless you have very large uteruses. If you have very large uteruses with adenomyosis, the LNG devices may not work. But if you have, a medium size, like maybe about 6 to 8 week size uterus with adenomyosis, LNG device will really work, and you can prevent a surgery and you can use this.
Ma'am, one more question from Dr. Kaushik. Is there anything called scanty menstruation? Many patients, they complain of less oligomenorrhea when they come to OPDs. And what will be the management? And what do we take as a limit of days, which is considered oligo or scanty?
See, when you have what was called as hypomenorrhea, I think what what Dr. Kaushik is asking is hypomenorrhea. So now hypomenorrhea is a problem which is more theoretically present rather than practically we see in the OPDs. So if the patient is hardly having a spot of bleeding every cycle, just one pad, not even one pad is soaked, maybe about 1/4 of the pad or a few spots are seen, then we need to see why is this happening, and we need to evaluate the patient. But if the patient says, the flow is not great, doctor, just about 2 pads or 1 pad is getting soaked, I don't think you should worry about it. But if you have very less flow, as I said, just a few spots, then you have to think a few things in mind. One is that it could be a case of someone who's going to have a premature ovarian failure. I have had patients who had very, very scanty flow, maybe 1 or 2 spots, and within a few cycles they became completely amenorrheic, and when I did the FSH, it was in postmenopausal range. The other diagnosis which you have to keep in mind is that tuberculosis endometritis, that also can cause very scanty flow, and maybe if you can do an endometrial biopsy and send it for TB-PCR, that may give you some information. But by and large, hypomenorrhea is more of a theoretical problem rather than a practical one.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think there is one more question, Pallavi, asked by Dr. Sanjana. And I think he has asked whether adenomyosis causes chronic leg pain. And I would say that it can cause leg pain or sciatica-like symptoms, because when the uterus is enlarged with adenomyosis, there is quite a lot of sensory input going in from the stretched out uterosacral ligaments because of the distorted anatomy and the large uterus. So the sensory pathway from the Lee Frankenhauser's plexus along the uterosacral ligaments can cause a lot of pain in the back, and there may be some radiating pain, sciatica-like pain in these patients. So don't ignore that, and you should get a scan done for these patients and check whether they have adenomyosis. And that cannot be taken lightly, because then there is nothing that you can do for that pain. And there may be a need to give them proper medical management, or you have to do a surgery for them.
Ma'am, one more question for you only. Dr. Chandra Tarashankar, he wants an elaboration on Dynogest treatment.
Yeah, so Dynogest basically is a progesterone therapy that we have been using now for endometriosis and adenomyosis quite extensively now. For the last 6 to 7 years, I'm using this medication. It is used in the dose of 2 milligrams. And the way you can give Dynogest is you can give it for 3 months initially, or you can give it for 6 months, which is 180 days. And you can give it every single day. 1 second. So no break in the therapy, 2 milligrams every day for 180 days. And then the patient may take a 10-day break up to a 30-day break, which is a 1-month break. See how she feels about symptom recurrence. And if she is comfortable, you may pause the Dynogest therapy. However, if she feels that her symptoms are coming back, she feels the pain, she feels the quality of life is getting affected, then she restarts the next lot of 180 days of Dynogest therapy. Dynogest therapy can be given, large data have shown that it can be given for 5 years. I'm trying to now gather data for patients who are now using it for more than 6 years. Get a bone mineral density scan done on these patients. And as long as that is fine and you're supplementing them with calcium, vitamin D, it's perfectly safe to give them Dynogest therapy. Just remember that when you first start Dynogest therapy, patients may have erratic spotting on and off. They may have some mood swings. You must reassure your patients that these are teething problems, because the hormonal axis needs to be reset in the body. And once the Dynogest works, it is very beautiful, a drug. And I have patients who do not want to come off the Dynogest. And sometimes, patients know the drug now, long-term users, they just pick it up, from the pharmacy and they continue taking. Of course, it's a little bit expensive, this drug. But then, Bayer has been very kind, and they, offer our patients therapy where, they pay for 4 months and then they get 2 months free. So that has been very kind on part of Bayer Pharma, because of their support for endometriosis care and their empathy towards the patients who have endometriosis.
Okay, ma'am. Dr. Archana, she's asking, what side effects should one look for when a patient is on long-term tranexamic acid for menorrhagia or for fibroid? And ma'am, how long can we give this tranexamic acid?
See, the tranexamic acid is given only periodically. That is only during the periods. So there is no evidence that suggests that you cannot give tranexamic acid for any number of years. Okay. So unless and until you have certain patients who are having a hypercoagulable state and who are having problems with coagulation, then you have to be worried. Like I had a patient who had renal transplant, and she was on she needed a treatment for menorrhagia, and she was an unmarried young girl who was just 22 years old. So for them, we need to be careful about the amount of tranexamic acid we use, because I had to discuss with the nephrologist and then only decide on the dosage, because we don't want any sort of coagulation that is clotting happening in the newly transplanted kidney. But otherwise, for a normal person, you can use it for 5 days every cycle for any number of years.
Okay. Ma'am, one more question from Dr. Archana only. What is the percentage of endometrial problems in patients who have taken 5 years of tamoxifen in chemo-induced menopause?
Who have taken tamoxifen and?
Tamoxifen in chemo-induced menopause.
In chemo-induced menopause. See, tamoxifen basically can increase the endometrial thickness. So it can lead to benign hyperplasias when the patient is on tamoxifen. So exact percentage, I'm sorry, I don't think I'll be able to give you exactly the percentage, how many people will be having it. But you have to be on the lookout whenever you have a patient on tamoxifen, especially someone who's having a CA breast and who's on tamoxifen. We need to be on the lookout for hyperplasia in the uterus, and we should have our threshold for biopsying such endometrium a bit low. So whenever we are in doubt, it is better we do a Pipple biopsy and rule out any problems.
Okay. Manisha ma'am,
Yeah.
there is question from Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee. Role of elagolix. Just a minute, ma'am. I skipped. Okay. Role of elagolix for medical management of endometriosis instead of GnRH analogs. Why IM route?
Hi, Dr. Siddharth. So elagolix for everyone, it's a GnRH antagonist, which is now being developed and used especially for the pain management in endometriosis patients. And it will hopefully have wider use in fibroids and AUB, etc. I have personally not got any experience of elagolix or Orliza, as it is called. And I look forward to more trials before I start using it in my clinical practice. So sorry, I have no personal experience of using this, but I know the theory behind the use of it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And there is a question from Dr. Archana again. Can a patient have positive TB PCR of endometrial biopsy without having any granuloma or inadequate tissue in the biopsy? And also,
Pallavi, I'm sorry, you're not audible properly. Can you increase the volume?
Yes, ma'am. Just a minute. Okay. Okay. Can a patient have positive TB PCR of endometrial biopsy without any granuloma or inadequate tissue in the biopsy? And also, no significant clinical symptom in postmenopausal patient having atrophic uterus.
No significant
clinical symptoms of any tuberculosis in postmenopausal patient having atrophic uterus. Is there any possibility of having positive TB PCR? Not understanding this question,
I think there are two questions in this. The first one is that can you have a positive TB PCR without having granulomatous lesion in the endometrium? Am I right?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay, so yes, you need not have a caseating granuloma in the endometrium to get a TB PCR which is positive. I'm sure Dr. Manisha also will agree that there are quite a few patients who are infertile, and when they do a TB PCR, it comes positive, and then they are treated accordingly. The second question is, in asymptomatic patients, in postmenopausal patients, why would you do a TB PCR unnecessarily? I didn't understand that part. I didn't understand that question.
Can I take that question? I think we have stopped doing TB PCR analysis. We have now moved on to doing GeneXpert because you get far too many false positive TB PCRs. In fact, I went through a spate once where, in a month I had 6 patients showing positive TB PCRs. And then, we had to just go back and check what it was, because it was not because tissue was inadequate or what, but you can get too many false positives. So the better thing is to consider doing a GeneXpert and to do a proper histopathology culture if you're worried about tuberculosis. And most of these patients with genital tuberculosis may be totally asymptomatic. They may have nothing, and especially a postmenopausal patient will have no symptoms whatsoever. So if at all you see anything in a postmenopausal woman, it will be abnormal bleeding. There won't be any other symptoms that will make you think it's tuberculosis. So unlikely.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And there is question from Subbalakshmi. Dr. Subbalakshmi, sorry. Management of 5 centimeter submucosal fibroid uterus in 54-year perimenopausal women having menorrhagia if she is not willing for surgery. What will we do?
I think you can do a hysteroscopic resection of a submucous fibroid, but then we need to tell that it's a large fibroid. One is that it is 5 centimeters. You could have excessive bleeding during that procedure. That is one. The second is you may not be able to completely remove it hysteroscopically. So it may be a staged procedure, as Dr. Manisha does, multiple times. That it will be a staged procedure. You remove a part of it, and then patient comes back with some more of it jutting into the uterine cavity. So it will be a staged procedure, and she should be ready for that, for multiple procedures.
Okay, ma'am. And Manisha ma'am, this is question for you. From Dr. Kaushik only. Endometriosis causes premature luteinization and luteal phase defect. How to overcome this?
So any patients that are going through assisted conception therapy, be it IUI or IVF, The best thing that you can do is you can support the luteal phase with progesterone. Progesterone of your choice. I do not use injectable progesterone because it's quite painful for patients. I prefer to use either oral progesterone or vaginal progesterone. That is what I like to use to cover the luteal phase, and that is quite helpful. So that is what you should do, especially in monitored, stimulated cycles, whichever way you're doing it. Luteal phase progesterone support is what I use. You could use HCG also if you want, but my personal favorite is using progesterone.
I think that is answered. For Dr. Manisha only, can adenomyosis cause chronic leg pain even when there is no bleeding?
Yeah, I answered that question, didn't I? I said that because of the stretch in the uterosacral ligament, the sensory pathway through the Lee-Frankenhauser's plexus can cause quite a significant amount of low backache and sciatica-like pain. So yes, adenomyosis can cause that kind of pain. So either you resort to medical management, or the better line of management would be to consider, taking that uterus away if the patient has finished her childbearing.
Okay, thank you. From Dr. Mamata, when do you advise ormeloxifene in abnormal uterine bleeding? I think this is for Anu, ma'am.
I don't use it at all because the evidence for that is not great. The evidence for using that particular molecule for AUB is not great. I feel one thing that as gynecologists we all have realized that LNG devices have really made our life easier. So most of our AUBs, unless there are structural abnormalities, and if the patient is not desirous of fertility, then we go ahead and use the LNG devices. With the molecule, what you said, it is not, the evidence is not great for us to have a good cycle control, or a prolonged cycle control is not there.
Yeah, ma'am. And one more question here. Can long-term use of progestogens, that is norethisterone, for severe menorrhagia can lead to breast cancer?
See, one thing is that we do not use norethisterone on long-term use. It is used, norethisterone is basically used only to control an acute episode of menorrhagia. So long-term usage is never done for norethisterone is never used for long-term purposes in AUB, because we get a good cycle control with good control of the bleeding when there is an acute episode with the norethisterone. But after that, we switch over either to combined oral contraceptive pills or LNG devices to get the cycle control. So the question of using it long-term doesn't arise at all.
This is one question, I think, for Manisha ma'am. Is there chance of endometriosis as ovarian cyst with fixed uterus in 49-year-old lady with FSH of 54 with CA 125 of 8? Can it be endometriotic cyst?
I mean, if you see, if you see ground glass appearance in a cyst when you do an ultrasound, and you think that the image looks like that of endometriotic cyst, then yes, maybe it is endometriosis. The CA125 is low at 8. So you need not operate on every patient that walks in through the door. Like I said, if I have seen more than 1,000 patients of endometriosis, only a fifth of them have needed surgery. So a woman who is perimenopausal, who is asymptomatic, just because she has a fixed uterus and you see a cyst, which is a small cyst, you don't have to operate. But yes, if it is a large cyst, which is more than 4 or 5 centimeters in size, has a fixed uterus, has painful perimenopausal bleeds, then yes, you may need to operate on it. But I think it has to be tailor-made to what the patient's symptoms are, what her presentation is, and what her aspirations are. And I think you have to design it as per what you think is appropriate for every given patient. But with the CA125 being 8, it is unlikely to have any malignant cells in it. And this woman is menopausal. For all you know, in a year or so, the woman will completely stop getting periods and she may be totally asymptomatic. So I think you need to monitor this patient on a year-on-year basis with a CA-125 level and an ultrasound to make sure that there is no malignancy brewing in the cyst. But apart from that, I think you can leave it alone.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Thank you. There is Dr. Kamlesh Mishra. As there is so much emphasis these days on colonic resection, segmental, discoid, or shaving, in your opinion, I think this is for Manisha ma'am, how many percentage of patients of deeply infiltrating endometriosis actually require this kind of extensive surgeries? And how can you decide the type of surgery a patient requires? When we essentially, okay. Yeah, I think
yeah, sorry. Okay. So Dr. Kamlesh, hi, and thank you for your question. So first of all, it is very, very important that when you suspect, when you do an ultrasound scan, and I do my own scans and I get a fair idea that there may be quite a lot of adhesions, and I do a thorough clinical examination, including a PVPR. Those patients where I think they are stage 4 endometriosis or DIE, deep infiltrating, I always get an MRI with contrast done because that helps me plan my surgery. Wherever we find that there is involvement of the rectosigmoid, so far, there is a problem. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So far, I have not needed to do segmental resection anastomosis in any patient, and almost 40% of my patients are stage 4 or DIE endometriosis patients. So not needed to do a colostomy or segmental resection in anybody. Most often we have done shaving of the endometriotic lesion and primary repair if ever need be. That is what we have done. Sigmoidoscopies, we always consent patients for a colostomy and sigmoidoscopy, etc. But so far never needed to do segmental resection in the 200 patient series that I have.
Okay. And can we decide this with confidence based on MRI?
One more point, except in patients where you have a clear-cut bowel nodule, like I showed you. So for those patients, which is a rarity, you have to do a segmental resection anastomosis. But those are very far and very few. The great majority of the patients are the typical, rectovaginal septum obliteration, bowel adherent to the posterior wall of the uterus, to the uterosacral ligament, to the lateral pelvic wall. Those are the typical cases where you see, the stage 4 DIE endometriosis, and you can most often get away with just shaving.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And Dr. Srinidhi Reddy here is asking, how do we use combined OC pills or progesterone only pills in the management of acute AUB?
Yeah, so when you have acute bleeding, acute menorrhagia, and you need to stop that bleeding, typically norepinephrine is a very, very good molecule which can be used to reduce, to stop the bleeding. We can also use a medroxyprogesterone, and combined oral contraceptive pills also can be used. So typically how I use them is that if it is norepinephrine, I start with the 5 milligram thrice daily, taper it down to twice daily, and then once daily, so that you have a 21-day coverage. Same thing with medroxyprogesterone. You start with 10 milligrams thrice daily, maybe for 3 days, and then 10 milligrams twice daily for 2 days, and then once daily, so that the entire cycle is 21 days. Combined oral contraceptive pills also can be used, which that is, in the first day you give 2 tablets of the oral contraceptive pill, and from the next day onwards it's a single dose pill. So any of these things can be used, but norepinephrine is a very good drug to stop acute menorrhagia.
Yeah, ma'am, role of testosterone injections in acute.
Role of
testosterone
injection.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think okay.
I didn't get 1 minute. Sorry, Pallavi, it is role of testosterone in what?
And in the acute AUB, ma'am.
No, we don't use it at all.
We don't use it at all.
No, we don't use
and
it.
And the role of ormiloxifene. So already you have answered.
For or meloxifene. I think that I answered that question.
Yeah,
but,
already have answered.
that's not a.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. There is question from Dr. Shirish Shinde. Patient of primary infertility with extensive adenomyosis. How to proceed for treatment? Ma'am, Manisha ma'am.
So just because the patient has adenomyosis does not mean that you need to jump to doing surgery, adenomyomectomy in the first instance. You must approach infertility the way you would approach any other patient of infertility. Make sure you assess tubal patency, make sure that you find out whether she's ovulating or anything. If her tubes are patent, you could still go and try simple therapy of timed intercourse follicular monitoring. You could still do IUI. Yes, if there is distortion of the cavity and you feel that the endometrial vasculature is compromised, then maybe you may need to resort to an adenomyomectomy. But again, that needs to be done by somebody who has an experience in doing it right, because adenomyomas are not like fibroids where you can just enucleate a fibroid and you can, suture the uterus back. Many a times there is no margins of delineation between normal myometrial tissue and the adenomyotic tissue. And you may end up making a mess of the uterus. You may end up having a lot of bleeding, and you may end up having to knock off a uterus. So we have seen all of these scenarios happen to people without much experience of doing adenomyomectomies. So you have to choose your patients with care. If you feel that there is a distortion of the endometrial cavity, you might sometimes just get away with doing hysteroscopic resection internally and then getting on with fertility therapy. So don't start thinking differently just because you see adenomyosis in the posterior wall. Approach a patient of infertility as you would do any other patient before you jump on to doing, high funda surgery where you could mess it up for the patient totally.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And Dr. Mamta here is asking, unmarried girls with polymenorrhagia fail to control bleeding with combined OC pills. What next?
So most of the time, this population where they're unmarried girls who are maybe in their late teens or the early 20s, they are most of the time we have a history of PCOS in them, and more than polymenorrhagia, they have delayed cycles with menorrhagia. Now, the most common scenario is that they're all on COCs. They take it for 6 months, 1 year, and they stop after 1 year, and they're back to their problem. They're once again having heavy flow, they're having delayed periods, and they're also having anemia because of that. Now, here it is extremely important to impress on the patient that lifestyle changes are more important than medications. So I tell my patients that if PCOS is the reason for this sort of menorrhagia and delayed periods, then it is lifestyle changes that are going to give them a relief on a lifelong basis, not the medications. I tell them that they should look into their diet, meet a dietitian if required, have a good diet control, exercise at least 1 hour every day, 45 minutes to 1 hour, they have to sweat it out every day, and see that they lose weight, or even if they are not losing weight, they have to remain fit by exercising. Exercising per se will bring the changes in the hormonal milieu in the body. So it is important that you look into the lifestyle changes rather than just medications to treat the menorrhagia that happens with PCOS. I hope I have answered her question.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. And one more question, Dr. Siddharth. Are you all using MyoSure for polyps and for submucosal fibroids?
I have no experience in using this particular molecule. I don't know about Manisha.
No, we are using hysteroscopic scissors, or we are using resectoscopes. That's all. We have no MyoSure.
And role of anastrozole in endometriosis, ma'am, Manisha ma'am.
Letrozole, anastrozole, all these aromatase inhibitors have been evaluated for their role in controlling endometriosis-associated pain. And simultaneously, letrozole can be used for fertility management also. Personally, I have not used anastrozole, but yes, I'm aware that it helps alleviate the pain associated with endometriosis, and you can use it for short term, but I personally have not used it for any of my patients.
Okay, ma'am, last question, I think we can take this up. Manisha ma'am, for lean PCOS girls, what to do?
So lean PCO is the hardest, kind of PCO to treat, because you can't say that go lose weight, and it will suddenly make everything better. They are the toughest and they have the highest level of insulin resistance, the lean PCO. So again, you must see what is it that they are really suffering from. What are the symptoms? Because in PCOS, girls, you may have a variety of symptoms. Some may present to you just with acne, some may present with hirsutism. So whatever treatment it has to be symptomatic and tailor-made to the girl as per what she's suffering from and what her aspirations are. That is number one. Number two, I think what works for, high levels of insulin resistance is a simple lifestyle thing where you advise them to have small meals. So 5 small meals a day, avoid excessive carbs, make sure that they are good on their fluid intake, and that they exercise. And exercise is not with view to losing weight, but just to pep up their metabolism. So that is what I would advise girls with lean PCOS. And of course, if a lean PCOS then wants to embark on a fertility journey, then she will need to, possibly consider ovulation and so on and so forth. So, but they are the toughest group of PCOS patients to treat, the lean PCO, because of their high levels of insulin resistance and by the virtue that they are not obese.
Okay.
And I would like to add one thing, Pallavi, that there are quite a few lean PCOs who come to me saying that, they have irregular periods. They are not getting their periods on a monthly basis. I think we need to counsel such patients and say that it is not a must that every lady has to have a period every month. It is not important. If you get at least about 5 periods, 4 to 5 periods, or maximum 6 periods in a year, that is good enough. So we should not consider that, having only 4 to 5 periods or 6 periods in a year as abnormal. So that is one thing that we have to counsel the patients regarding period cycle.
Okay. So do we have time to take few more questions? I think we have 2 more questions.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Dr. Preeti, she's asking 52 years old perimenopausal women with overweight and diabetes and hypertension. Hysteroscopy DNC done, and there is nothing specific in that, and she's not relieved of menorrhagia. So what to do next?
Yeah, Dr. Preeti. So now if she's a 52-year-old, then she's very close to her menopausal status. And you have done a hysteroscopy DNC, and she is a diabetic and hypertensive. You can put in a LNG device inside and see whether she gets symptomatic relief. Just because she's a diabetic and hypertensive or she's obese, when the DNC, when the endometrial pathology says that there is nothing abnormal about it, I don't think you should jump in and do a hysterectomy. I don't think we should do that. We can put in an LNG device and see how she behaves. If she responds well and good, then your job is done. For the next 3-4 years, you keep it in, and then maybe after 5 years, you can take it out. But it is important that you impress just getting her diabetes under control, getting her hypertension under control, and see that whether she can lose some weight.
Okay, thank you. And Manisha ma'am, bladder endometriosis, which was diagnosed post-EUR biopsy. What is post-EUR management?
2 of my patients who had bladder nodules, endometriotic nodules, the way I managed them was that 2 things. One was I put in a Mirena into, which is the LNG IUS device in the uterus. And 2, I also gave them, because the LNG takes about 3 to 6 months to settle in. So I put them simultaneously on the Dynogest tablets, and that seemed to do the trick for these patients. And they have been fine since then. So that is what I have done. But even if you didn't want to put the LNG device, you could safely give them Dynogest and see how they go with it. because unlike a uterus, which can be easily dispensed with a hysterectomy, you cannot knock off a bladder. At the most, you can resect out a nodule in the bladder, but you can never know whether she will get a recurrence in the bladder one more time. So Dynogest is a good drug to try for bladder endometriosis.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Subbalakshmi, she's asking, in pregnancy with adenomyosis, how to manage pain and what are the additional precautions do we have to take for her pregnancy and delivery?
See, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Manisha.
In terms of women getting pregnant with adenomyosis, I think, it's good because pregnancy has a calming effect on endometriosis and allied conditions like adenomyosis. So their pregnancy is no different. They do need progesterogenic support, and I would continue the progesterogenic support up to the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. And apart from that, I don't think her pregnancy is any different to, any other pregnancy that there is. So you would give her the same TLC that you would offer any other pregnant patient. And Anu, do you want to add anything here?
I don't think so. As you said, pregnancy itself is therapeutic for adenomyosis. So it's a form of therapy with such high progesterone in the body. The adenomyosis will sort of be suppressed and she'll have a pain-free period in those 9 months.
She'll be a happy bunny, and then if you encourage them to breastfeed, that has added beneficial value. So pregnancy and breastfeeding most certainly recommended, and it's a happy moment for any adenomyotic patient to have successfully got pregnant. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, one more this thing. Is DNC must before putting Mirena? LNGIU.
Is what?
DNC, endometrial biopsy.
Is it required before putting a Mirena? Yeah. See, if you're putting a Mirena, pardon me?
For any age group patients, ma'am.
Yeah. Now, if you're putting a Mirena for abnormal uterine bleeding, then it is better we do a endometrial biopsy. I think I gave you the indications about when an endometrial biopsy is required, in what section of patients an endometrial biopsy is required in the slide. So those are the indications for your endometrial biopsy. But if you're going to put an LNG device for contraception, there are women who say that I want it only for contraception. Then there is no need to do a biopsy at all. But if you're doing it for an abnormal uterine bleeding, remember that the device is going to stay in for 5 years. It is always, and PIPPL is a very, very simple procedure and it is hardly painful. So it is almost a painless procedure. So it just takes a few seconds. It is better you do the biopsy, know what it is, and then you can put in the device.
Okay. And, I think we are done with all the questions.
I think there's one more question that has just come up.
Okay, from Dr. Mamata, it seems 44 years para to leaving to, treated with LNG IUS, developed fibroid polyp in a span of 2 months with intermenstrual bleeding. What next should be advised?
See, this particular case has to be very much individualized. You need to know what is the size of the polyp. Is it a very small polyp? It's 1 or 2 centimeters. Then I don't think we need to be worried. We can just wait and watch and see how the LNG device behaves in her. But if it is a large fibroid polyp, which is very unlikely, you would have seen that when you're putting the LNG device, you would have generally done a transvaginal scan or a pelvic scan, which would have picked up such a fibroid polyp. Unless and until the scan was not done by a doctor who's good at it, and then later on you have picked it up in a better center, then it's a different scenario. But otherwise, large polyps would have been picked up before you put the device inside. But after the device is put, if a small polyp develops, I don't think we need to worry about it. You just wait and watch and see how things go by.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Manisha and Dr. Anu Sridhar, for your time and the effort taken by you for this presentation. And I would request Dr. Manisha to give a vote of thanks.
So thank you to everyone who has participated in this webinar. I do hope that we managed to address at least some of the questions pertaining to endometriosis, adenomyosis, and abnormal uterine bleeding. The subjects are too vast And we will be very happy to receive communication from any of you should you have any further questions. Time is limited, so for the paucity of time, I guess we have to end the session here, but it's been a wonderful session. We have enjoyed talking to you. We have enjoyed receiving the questions and discussing the possible solutions to each of these questions. Heartfelt thanks to the entire team at Fortis BG, to Biopharma, and as well as to Mike Ideas for organizing this webinar. And we look forward to discussing many more topics with all of you in the near future. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good evening.